Hello and welcome to our panel. My name is Gail Myers, and I'm going to be the moderator for this amazing panel today. Our panel, the conference is Agroecological City, Sovereignty, Resilience, and the Future of Food. And today we're going to talk about innovative land access for urban farming around private partnerships. Let me introduce myself quickly. I am one of the co-founders of Farms to Grow, and we have been working with Black farmers as the organization for about 16 years. My research with Black farmers extends from about 1997, so I don't know, that's 20 plus, I think. Um, but these are topics that have been a part of my research and ideas that I've looked at in a particular way within the context of Black farming. So we're going to be talking about issues around land sovereignty, land access, land justice, land tenure. We have some amazing panelists, and I'm going to do an introduction, but I can't wait to introduce them and get to the real meat of why we're here. Let me just set a background that is familiar to me. After the Civil War, Black people in the South owned very little land. There were some landowners in the northern parts of the country, but in the southern states, after 1865, not many. Well, by 1910, which is the peak year for Black land ownership, there were over 213,000 Black farm operators who owned or partially owned 12.8 million acres of land. Now, these farmers had access to the land. Many farmers had access. As a matter of fact, there were over 920,000 Black farmers at the height of farm operators, Black farm operators. All of these farmers were not owners. They were sharecroppers or tenants, but they had access. Even the landowners had access, but the landowners had a little bit more sovereignty because they could dictate what they grew, when they grew it. They could develop families around their farms, and they had a lot more ownership and say. Now, mind you, they didn't have much justice, but they had land sovereignty. And so, the way I've been looking at this work with the foundations of Black ownership that emerged in the 19th century, they were all vested in land. Children of landowners married and stayed within proximity of the family's farm. They were able to, the husband and wife were able to stay in the community, then they got their farms. So communities grew. Having land and having to be tending your own land really lended itself to community growth and development. And so for this panel, I want to, try to bring some parallels around how we can possibly look at land sovereignty and land access by looking at the parallels between sharecroppers, who were probably very good at having access, but they didn't have any sovereignty. Sharecroppers and the tenant farmers had a little bit more. And also this speaks to the exploitation of labor on land. But the food sovereignty and the land sovereignty issues, I think I would say that the landowners were the first bit of land sovereign farmers, although they were up against a lot dealing with land justice. So just want to frame that right there within the context of my work. So, in the Bay Area, with some of the highest real estate costs in the country, private Bay Area land presents quite a few economic obstacles for agroecological endeavors. And so for this panel, we're going to talk to our panelists and examine some of the various ways in which they have been able to overcome some of these limitations and relying on local tax incentives, indigenous land rematriation, the collective ownership, partnering with faith-based organizations and justice-oriented community land trusts, and see some of the specific strategies and mechanisms and partnerships that have been helpful in securing land and land tenure. So let me say a little bit, just a brief a bit, so sort of, and I'll set this more of a stage here about who owns the land in the U.S. So the federal government owns about 33% of the 2.3 billion acres of land. Private individuals own 60%. So about 7 to 8 million farmers, ranchers, forest owners hold close to about 90% of all the privately held land. There are 50 individual families and their heirs who own over 31 million acres of land, and they represent about 1.4% of those that are private landowners. And this is data from the 2018 Land Report magazine, if you want to check that a little bit further. So that's there. Who owns it now? But let's think about, and I'm going to share a little bit more information with you about how this land that was taken from our First Nations communities was distributed and disposed of in various policies and acts. So let's start with the 1619. The Virginia Company issued what they call the head right system, where to get people to leave England, they were giving 50 acres for every person that came over here, and they bought their family, and they could receive 50 acres as well. 1732, James Oglethorpe had another head right system, which developed a lot of Georgia and the southern states, 50 acres to every person who paid their way to come and brought their family. And if they had a family of 6, they could receive up to 500 acres. In Baltimore, Lord Baltimore granted 100 acres to every settler that came to Baltimore, to Maryland. And everybody that came with them, they got an additional 100 acres. The first major land disposal system was the Land Ordinance Act of 1785. Thomas Jefferson was very instrumental in getting this. It actually create that survey and was able to sell a lot of the land west of the Appalachians. It also created our public school system. There was a designation for that. Then we got the Preemption Act of 1841, which allowed farmers to settle on land legally before they even purchased it. So they could buy up to 160 acres for $1.25 an acre. Then there was the Homestead Act, one that I think many of us are very familiar with, which Lincoln signed and allowed for male and female to have up to 100 acres. If you stayed on that land for 5 years, you get up 100 acres of land. That same year, we also did the Morrill Act, which created the land grant universities. So that's just a brief, there's so many other acts and things out there. Sort of the history of the land grabs, labor exploitation of Indigenous and Black experience, the theft and the dispossession of Indigenous land, the racist practices, failures of the 40 acres and a mule, and ongoing discrimination against land ownership. And so that's the backdrop. That's where we're starting from. And that's where, we want to let that be part of the assumptions, the common, sort of the knowledge here. And now I think I want to introduce the panel, so they can discuss some of the various strategies that they use to securing land and sovereignty. And then they can tell us a little bit more about how they see sovereignty and this issue of land access, land tenure, and some other issues that they would like to bring up. So our first speaker, I'd like to introduce Karina Gould, who is LaShawn Ohlone, and she is the tribal spokesperson for the Confederate villages of the LaShawn Ohlone. She was born and raised in her ancestral homeland, the Ohlone territory of Hushine. She's the mother of 3, the grandmother of 4. Karina has worked on preserving and protecting the ancient burial sites of her ancestors through the Bay Area for decades. She's the co-founder, co-director of Segoriate Land Trust. She's helped to bring the work of rematriation into public consciousness. She's a celebrated speaker locally, nationally, and internationally at schools, universities, and conferences and community events. And she regularly offers protocols, stories, guidance, and history and vision. Thank you for being on this panel today, Karina. Let me introduce Raul Lozano. Raul is the founder and executive director of Valley Verde, a nonprofit organization that provides support for low-income families who want to grow food in their backyards. With more than 22 years of experience in nonprofit leadership, he first brought his love for gardening together in a program he created for the Sacred Heart Community Services in 2009. The La Mesa Verde would be the precursor to the Valley Verde, which Raul founded as a separate nonprofit 2 years later. Raul is also a master gardener and is a senior fellow of the American Leadership Forum of Silicon Valley with a strong commitment to social justice. He was also the first in San Jose to take advantage of the Urban Agriculture Incentive Zone program. It was enacted through 2014's Assembly Bill 551 and was adopted in 2015 in Santa Clara County and in 2016 by the city of San Jose. Thank you, Raul, for being here. Then I'd like to introduce you to Reverend Dr. Melinda V. Mclean. Reverend Dr. Mclean is an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ. She's a musician and a writer. She is the pastor for the Good Table United Church of Christ in El Cerrito. And recently, Dr. Mclean and the Good Table UCC partnered with Planting Justice, an Oakland-based food sovereignty and economic justice nonprofit, to purchase the Adachi Florist and Nursery in El Sobrante, California, where they're building a new nursery, a community gathering space, local food and arts marketplace, pay what you can, and a pay it forward community cafe that also honors the long history of Japanese-owned nurseries in the Bay Area. And it will provides an outlet for local farmers and artisans to sell their products. Melinda lives in El Sobrante, a semi-rural part of San Francisco Bay Area, with her wife, Janine Roger, the project manager for the renovation of the Adachi property, and an avid gardener. Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Melinda, for being a part of this panel. And last but not least, of course, Mai Nguyen is an heirloom grain and Southeast Asian crop farmer who has long balanced farming and farming organizing. Mai applies their background in climate research and Buddhist farming to cultivate regionally adapted heritage grains and Vietnamese seed crops. They also organize farmers and eaters for economic democracy and racial justice in the food system. Mai co-founded the California Grain Campaign in order to establish a robust California whole grain economy that centers around small farm viability. In 2017, they helped pass the Farmer Equity Act, a momentous civil rights bill for California agriculture. Mai is currently co-director of Minnow, an organization focused on land tenure for farmers of color. They've been recognized for their farming and advocacy work as a 2018 Berkeley Food Institute Change Maker, and a 2018 GRIST 50 Fixer, and as a recipient of the Business Alliance for Local Living Economies Fellowship. So those are just a little bit of background about our presenters today, and I'm sure they'll say a lot more about who they are and what their work involves. So why don't we get started with you, Karina? Jump right in. If you would share your experiences with your organization.
Thank you so much, Gail. Porsche Tuhi Ka'atla Shanka Ka'atra'at Karina. Good day, everyone. My name is Karina Gould. I am the chairperson and spokesperson for the Confederated Villages of Lashawn. I am talking to you from my homeland of Huichin, where my ancestors have had an unbroken tie to this land since the beginning. I'm so happy to be a part of this, and I hope that all of you are well from whichever territory in this country you're in. I offer you the opportunity to find out more about whose land you are on, the name of that tribe, the language that they speak, and to be involved in the work that they're doing around any issues that they see is as important to them as tribal people. I'm going to share my screen now and talk a little bit because we are going to talk about 10 minutes each about things, and then we're going to go into discussion. And 10 minutes is a very short time to talk about a life work, right? And so, sorry, 1 second. I was amazed by the work that that Gail was talking about land and how land was given away at the offset of this country being created. And wherever land was given away, we have to know that it happened because people died, and tribal land was given away to folks that got here without knowing sometimes whose tribal land that they were on. And so the land anywhere in this country that you're at right now, so what we call as Indigenous people Turtle Island, is still Indigenous land. And it doesn't matter who, what I use is quote unquote owns it, it's still Indigenous land that was given to that tribe, what we believe, and as a part of taking care of that land, to cultivate that land, to take care of it. So I want to just go back a couple of 100 years in California. And just talk about this briefly. A couple of 100 years ago in the state of California, this land was not touched. The colonization that happened in California happened much differently than what happened on the East Coast. You see, when folks were signing the Declaration of Independence in 1776, was only the beginning of the colonization of California people by the Spaniards. So around the same time, so California was first colonized by Spanish and Spanish missions, where my ancestors were enslaved at. My ancestors were directly enslaved at Mission Dolores in San Francisco and Mission San Jose in Fremont. And then there were multiple, and then there was a genocide after genocide, right? So for 99 years, we were under that plan. Mexico gave out huge swaths of land when they received their independence from Spain. And so my ancestors lived and worked in many different of those ranches. One of them is called Peralta Ranch, the San Antonio Ranch in the Bay Area that goes from about San Leandro to Albany. And so my ancestors worked on those ranches as slaves as well. And then the American period happened. When the Mexican-American War happened and we lost, Mexico lost the war, Native people also began to run from a third wave of genocide. And it's something that we don't hear in the history books, but the first laws of California were extermination laws of California Native people. It was not about the creation of treaties anymore. So backed by federal dollars of 1.7 million, people were actually able to hunt down Native people $5 a head and 25 cents an ear in order to make room for the gold rush that was coming in and to make room for the land. And so running after those three waves of genocide, our people have had to go into hiding in order to survive that. 3 consecutive waves of having the land changed. And so our land actually was never farmland before settlers or colonizers got here. It was actually the introduction of farming techniques and orchards and the movements of our waters and the introductions of farm animals that actually destroyed the habitats of our lands and our waterways. Moving forward, we created a land trust a few years ago, the first urban Indigenous women-led land trust in the country. And the reason was not to actually grow food. The reason was because we are what is called a non-federally recognized tribe. That means that we do not have a land base and we are homeless in our own homelands. Even though we have an unbroken tie to what is now called the Bay Area, we have no homelands. So one of the stark numbers that I see is like Alameda County is like 475 acres, 475,000 acres. Ohlone people own less than a half an acre together. And that includes my house and my auntie's house. And so on our own homelands, we have no place to be. We started this work as Indian people organizing for change back when there was this whole development that was happening around the late 1990s when internet was created. And it caused this mass wave of gentrification happening then. People were outbidding each other for houses and apartments. But they started finding my ancestral remains, and we started to do education about those places that were being destroyed in order for development to happen. I love this picture because this is a beautiful Mediterranean landscape. It's actually Oakland. This is Lake Merritt. And it's a beautiful picture of this place that has welcomed people for hundreds of years now. It has changed our ways, but around this beautiful lake, my ancestors had at least 3 or 4 different villages, and you would never see it, and it is never talked about because we have been erased out of history. We came up with a solution that we thought that after over 20 years of working on protecting and preserving the sacred sites of our ancestors, we realized that even though we were trying to stop the ancestors from coming out of the ground, if we wanted them back, where were we going to put them? We have no land base, right? You take all of the institutions in the Bay Area and they hold our ancestral remains and funerary objects. UC Berkeley alone holds over 9,000 of those ancestral remains and funerary objects. All of the institutions around the Bay Area hold my ancestors' remains in them. The last place that we believe that our ancestors are put into the ground when we all have ceremonies and funerals for them, that's not true with our Indigenous people here in the Bay Area. They are moved in order to provide spaces for growing developments around the Bay Area. So after years of trying to fight this, we said, well, if we wanted to bring those ancestors home, if we wanted to do the work of healing, if we wanted to put them back into a final resting place, we would need to have land, because we have no land as a homeless tribe in the area. And the work was also important because the Forced Relocation Policy Acts of the United States government that moved Indigenous people off of their reservations and into cities as a part of the assimilation project. They thought that if they moved the people in within a few generations, that they would no longer be Indian, and then they would not have to provide provide Native people with any of the promises of education and health care and other things that happens with federally recognized tribes. And so it became an urban Indigenous women-led land trust. I have helped to doula Native women's babies until we have raised our children together here in the Bay Area in an urban setting. And the Bay Area is actually one of the highest populations of Native people in the country, second only, I think, to Navajo Nation. And so many people came out here and have raised their children for generations now. We are now on the 3rd generation of young people that have grown up in the Bay Area, and many have never gone home, but they have no access to land, and land ways for us to grow our own medicinal foods and to have a way for us to have ceremony, and that is a connection to the land. So it's an important because there needs to be a connection to the land in order to do these things. And so the solution was to create a land trust, to put land back into Indigenous hands in order for us to create spaces that had held ceremony, a way for us to reimagine what the Bay Area could look like, a way for us to grow our medicinal foods, our plants and foods. And so we began to do this. We created Hametka at Lashawn, and Hametka in our language means a place where we gather together. At Giltrack, what we now call Quail Creek, we began to tend land there, farming and food distribution and medicinal garden. And then we have a space in West Oakland called Ramai, where my daughter and granddaughter are in this picture to the side here. Ramai in our language means west, and it's a community garden that we received a few years ago in West Oakland, working with the Northern California Land Trust. They were able to give us a long-term lease, 99-year lease on this land, this community garden that was there, in order for us to grow foods and medicinal plants. So this is part of Ramai, some pictures. I thought it was better to show pictures of places and stuff. Ramai was this beautiful garden that was put there. There was an African-American woman, jazz singer from Oakland, and she, in her will, gave this land to the Land Trust to have a community garden in West Oakland, so people could have access to food and growing. It came with 13 beautiful fruit trees and some boxes that we have rebuilt. We have put a tool shed in there now. There's community garden beds that are growing food. We use some of that food to redistribute, and we were planning on opening it up for boxes for community members, and then COVID hit. So we planned it and got it ready. We were growing medicinal plants there. We have a collaboration with the American Indian Child Resource Center, which is an after-school program that does wraparound services for American Indian students. And they have a few boxes there where students are growing vegetables and are creating salsas and doing some entrepreneurial things there. And we also, the tool shed holds space for us to dry our medicines and our teas and things. This is LaShawn. This was the very first piece of land that was returned to us. And it's not this whole piece of land that you see on the left-hand side. Where you see that circle of people is right about it. It's a 1/4 acre lot in deep East Oakland on 105th Avenue on shared space with Planting Justice. And Planting Justice gave us this land, returned this land to us after they had gone to Standing Rock. They went to Standing Rock and were moved by what had happened on that land. Hale and Gavin said that when they came back, and that they were asked, the elders, what should they do when they go home? And the elders said, well, you should work with the First Nations people on whose land you're on. Well, they didn't know us and we didn't know them. And there's an Athabascan elder, Diane Williams, who works on the land as an educator, and she introduced us to them. And we sat under this California oak tree one summer day, and they told us that story and said, we would like to give you this 1/4 acre of land that we're not using anymore, or we're not using yet. And Janella LaRose and myself looked at each other, and of course I cried because this is the first piece of land returned to our tribe in 250 years. We had no land base. And I believe my ancestors have everything to do with this. We had been doing work for years, educating the public about burial sites and where we would put them. And so this water, where you see it right along here, culverted, is LaShawn, who our people are named after. That freeway is actually on Phil, where the bay would have met the freshwater creeks. So this place is probably on a village site or very near one of our ancient village sites. And it happens to be a 1/2 mile walk from my home. So these ancestors have done miraculous things in bringing land back in a different kind of a way. So we decided that we were going to take the land back, but we had stipulations. We had to build a relationship. How weird would it be for us to cross through Planting Justice to be on this land without building relationships? And so Janella LaRose spent that first year working there on site, and we hired one other young person cleaning that up. Transmissions were in there, garbage, and we created hugels to grow medicinal plants, and we cleared out the center for a ceremonial site, and we created Hametka, which is a container that serves the purpose of taking care of the community. Hametka is a container that was built out where we have traditional medicines there. We have food available. We're building out a kitchen, an outdoor kitchen. We have a fresh water tanks, 3,000 gallons of fresh water, plus another 1,200 gallons of rain catchment water, because we realize that as Indigenous people, it's our responsibility as hosts to take care of our guests. And we know that in this particular area in Oakland, that it's one of those places that no one's going to come to save if it's a man-made or a natural-made disaster, and that this would be a touchstone for community members to come and have a safe place to be. At Giltrack Farms, we are growing foods that we redistribute out to community members. Our medicines are growing there. Our young people are learning how to use the medicinal plants in ways that they're able to distribute food out. We engage the community, all communities, to come out to the land. You know, one of the wonderful and beautiful things that I read in a book called Braiding Sweetgrass, Robin Kimmerer, who is a beautiful writer, and she's an ethnobotanist and a biologist, and she's also a Native person, talks about this way of human beings coming to the land and working it. And when their hands are in the land up to right around 8 minutes, they begin to hum or to sing. It reminds us that our connection as human beings is supposed to be in the land. Especially in urban areas, we have all fallen away from what our connection is to the land and what that means, and the joy it brings for our psyche, our bodies, our hearts, and our joy. And to have children running through there playing is beautiful. We're making these medicines. Elders are teaching young people are teaching elders. It goes both ways. We're growing these foods and medicines in order for us to take out to the community. And so they're making fire cider in order to help to build immune systems. We hand these out to people that are on the front lines doing work, our elders that are there. We began to do food distribution during COVID because we realized it was our responsibility to ensure that those that were on the front lines, immunosuppressed, those that had small children at home, it was our responsibility to do what we could to get food out to them. And so I'm going to stop there because I could talk for a long time, but I want to ensure everybody else has to. So thank you. I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Karina. Amazing, amazing. I got lots of things I can think about to ask you, but we'll get to that later. And right now, I want to ask that Raul, if you would go ahead and make your presentation.
Okay, thank you for having me here. So again, my name is Raul Lozano. I'm the founder of Valley Verde out in San Jose in the South Bay. And I started Valley Verde in response to the 08-09 economic crash, when the housing crash really put a lot of people out of work and people were losing their homes. And you know, I'd come home and put on the TV and there'd be long lines of people at the food banks trying to feed their families, you know. And so I decided to start Valley Verde to help people grow their own food in their backyards in food insecure communities. And you know, I garden. You know, I just like doing it. I'm not a crazy fanatic about it, but I like growing my own food. And so I thought it'd be a good idea to teach people how to grow food. So I enrolled 100 families in the first cohort, and it was intentional, but most of the families were people of color. And the first things that they would ask me, they would come up to me and say, Raul, are we going to grow, a Vietnamese person was, are we going to grow bitter melon? I said, no, we're not, you know, or a Mexicano would come to me and say, are we going to grow epazote? And I said, no, we're not going to do it. And the reason that I was telling these people that we couldn't grow these varieties of vegetables and herbs is because nurseries, the corporate nursery community was not growing, we're not growing these seedlings for the multi-ethnic community. So every time I'd go to one of these growers and ask them for these multi-ethnic seedlings, they were growing mainstream vegetables like, you know, zucchini and tomatoes and, all these things that, mainstream America eats in their dinner tables. And so I said, well, I'm going to have to buy a greenhouse and grow these seedlings myself. And that's where the land issue came up, trying to find some land to build a greenhouse. So I purchased a greenhouse in, I think it was 2003 or 2. And I started looking for land. I should have secured the land first and then bought the greenhouse, but I did it backwards. And so I'm looking for some land, and I thought I had a couple of deals, with some landowners outside of San Jose and Morgan Hill and Gilroy and stuff. And every time I thought I had a deal with them to lease some land to me at a really reduced price, something that was affordable, it would fall through. And so, I had this greenhouse sitting in my backyard waiting to install it with no land to put it on. So I finally the city of San Jose passed the Urban Agricultural Incentive Zone ordinance, where landowners, if they weren't using land and wanted to lease it to an urban agricultural organization, they would get tax benefits, property tax benefits. So the city of San Jose, they passed the ordinance in 2016, and I was part of the advocacy group that were getting the city of San Jose to pass this ordinance. I didn't play a big role, but I was a supportive role. There were some people that were leading the charge that were really dedicated to the cause and got the city to do this. And one of the landowners in San Jose actually was keeping track of this because they had a piece of land that they wanted to lease out to an urban agricultural organization. So as soon as the ordinance went into effect in January 2015, I was contacted by this landowner. He had heard about us, and we were able to come to an agreement for a 5-year lease at $1 a year. And it was about 11,000 square feet, about 1/4 of an acre. And the first thing I did was put up our greenhouse and started, building staff, and we all along through this time, we were running our home gardening program. So by that time, we already had about 300 families that have gone through the program. So each family gets a year, they enter a year-long program on how to grow organic vegetable gardens and how to, maintain them, how to keep them healthy and producing vegetables for their families. They plant a spring garden and they plant a winter garden. So so we get this greenhouse, which is great, and we get this land, which is great. We start growing seedlings, and we start growing we focus on multi-ethnic seedlings. So we're growing bitter melon, we're growing curry leaf, we're growing epazote, we're growing all these varieties that are not available on the market. We ended up growing, now we grow close to 15,000 seedlings. Through this lease of this land, we were able to leverage it and Google is building a major campus in downtown San Jose. They came to us and offered another 11,000 square feet to use for about 4 years that we're going to be there. And we really didn't see the incentive of moving over there just for the sake of moving. We didn't have the funding or the budget to expand our operations. So they came in and incentivized the deal by providing funds to purchase new greenhouses, which we really needed. And so we ended up, so now we have 2 sites of about 11,000 square feet each. We have 4 greenhouses now, and that's provided us the means to expand programs. So now that we have the greenhouses in place and we're growing all these varieties, we started a program called Super Jardineros, where people that have gone through our year-long home gardening program can actually enroll into our Super Jardineros program and learn how to grow seedlings in their backyards, in addition to growing their vegetables in raised beds. So we put them through a 3-year apprenticeship program where they learn all the aspects of growing multi-ethnic seedlings or seedlings in general. And we pay them to grow seed during this apprenticeship. We pay them to grow seedlings that we order from them. They sell them to us and we pay them for the seedlings. So they're actually start running their own micro business this way. And we have 3 graduates that have gone through the program. We have 4 new super jardineros that started last year, and we're adding 4 more this year. So what's happening here, because we got this land that was leased to us, we were able to start the super jardineros program, and in March, in about 3 weeks, March 27th, we're opening up a nursery. We're actually going to be selling these multi-ethnic seedlings retail. And there isn't anybody in the Santa Clara County that is actually selling these types of seedlings. And so we're hoping that the people that are interested in growing homeland varieties of seedlings for themselves will come and purchase these seedlings, and the mainstream folks. So we're teaching our families, all of our programs are taught through a food justice lens, and teaching our families how to practice food sovereignty. And we feel that we have to do the same thing and be healthy and be as self-sufficient as possible. And we're launching this business to earn earned income to do just that. We also are able to, because we acquired these 2 pieces of land through the lease, that we're able to give gardening classes to the general public, in addition to our home gardening program for families in need in these food insecure areas. And it's just been a really acquiring these 2 leases has really brought a lot more resources to Valley Verde. Every time during planting time, in our these sites are really active because the greenhouses are full of seedlings, and we're building the raised beds and having our families pick up their gardening materials and stuff. I invite all of our funders, all of the gatekeepers, all these people that can actually open doors for us, and we've been able to generate even more income for Valley Verde to expand our home gardening program, because we're trying to reach as many families as possible to grow their own food. We've been able to leverage that to expand our staff. We're been able to leverage our influence to actually get conversations going with some city council members. They've been asking us how to expand the urban agricultural landscape in San Jose. So it's offered me and Valley Verde a lot of opportunities because of this urban agricultural incentive zone.
Wow, what an amazing story, Raul. Thank you. Let's welcome Reverend Dr. Melinda Mclean, and she'll talk to us about the amazing work that they're doing.
Good morning and welcome, everyone. I'm going to share my screen here and show you a little bit of the project we're involved in. My virtual background is from literally our backyard along the banks of the San Pablo Creek in the Wichin territory of the Ohlone people. This particular piece of land is in El Sobrante now, called El Sobrante. And El Sobrante in Spanish means the remainder or the leftover. And this particular area of the San Francisco Bay Area was not originally part of the large Castro family Spanish land grant, but was sort of outside that. And the Castro family, back during the mission period, petitioned for this land and called it the El Sobrante, the remainder, in 1841. Then when the gold rush came, of course, the Spanish land grant system fell apart, as Karina Gould mentioned earlier. This land was ranching land owned by many different people. And then in World War II, it became an air base, training military base for the Air Force. And after the war, in the early 50s, a small housing development was developed here. And a woman who was a founding member of the church I now serve, named Alice Parks, purchased this house and land. And she was a nurse, an Army nurse, who was stationed in Japan during the American occupation of Japan after World War II, and then was later head of nursing at Kaiser Richmond. We bought this from Alice in 2014 and moved here in 2015, 2 weeks before Alice passed away. And I say that because understanding the history of any small piece of land, being able to go all the way back to the First Nations people and forward, is useful. And in my particular case, I can tell that history in about 30 seconds because there hasn't been a lot of people here. This creek, there are shell mounds here. UC Berkeley excavated part of San Pablo Creek, and as Karina mentioned earlier, dug up her ancestors. It still breaks my heart. And we try to honor that history in ways we know how. So all of that said, I want to share with you a little bit about what we're doing now. The other thing that Karina Gould and I share is a partnership with Planting Justice and Gavin Raiders and Hale Zande. Our church, which was founded in 1950 in El Cerrito, spent a long time up on the hill there. And in 2006, sold that property, invested the proceeds, camped the Lutherans down in El Cerrito for many years. And when they called me as a pastor in 2014 to talk about a new way of being church, that's what we began working on. The congregation had three primary passions in ministry. They cared about food, they cared about justice, and they cared about the arts. And in terms of food, like many churches, they had primarily been engaged in food issues as acts of mercy. They'd done feeding programs. They'd been part of funding agencies, and they'd had various partners. When you think about food banks and you think about soup kitchens and food pantries, this is sort of the mercy work. And this is, just feeding hungry people without really thinking about the sources of that hunger and the history of all of that. So I'll tell you a little story. Since I'm a pastor, I always have to tell a little story. Once there was a village next to a river, and this story, I have no idea where it came from, but the villagers noticed that there were people washing up on the river, and some were injured and others died, and they did their best to care for them. And eventually some folks in the village decided to go upstream and find out, why are people washing up on the shores? And they discovered upstream a bridge where there were bandits who were robbing people and throwing them in the river. And once they finally dealt with that problem, with the theft and the violence, they were able to finally reach some justice, and they went from mercy to justice. Some of us are called to the upstream work of justice, and some of us do the downstream work of compassion and care. And I think most of us over the years do a mix. And there's often, at least in my experience in faith communities and other places, sometimes there's animosity between the people who only do compassion work and mercy work, and then the people who do the justice work. And the people who do the justice work often think that people who do the compassion and mercy work are a little weak. But we need to do all of it and honor all of that work. And because of the history, which Gail started us off with and Karina expanded upon, because of our history, I believe we have to be engaged in reparative work and the work of decolonizing all the things that have happened around land. And that's where our church sort of entered into our passions, finding our partner with Planting Justice. We didn't know exactly what that would look like, but we felt like we wanted to feed people, we wanted to bring people together, we wanted to not be just about our own sort of spiritual development, but we wanted to really serve the community in, as I said earlier, food and justice in the arts. And so we began to imagine that we might be a pay what you can and pay it forward cafe that could also have music and different ways of serving the community, that we could find ways to help that were beyond what churches traditionally do. And so we began looking for a spot to do this using the proceeds from the sale of the campus. And we just couldn't find anything. The Bay Area is difficult, as everyone has said. It's difficult to find anything, even if you have money. It's difficult to find and develop anything. And we finally heard about the Adachi property when the Adachi family, after over 105 years in the nursery business, finally reached a generation that no longer wanted to be in the nursery business. And they had sold the property to a man who wanted to develop a gas station. And we already have 13 gas stations in the little town of El Sobrante, and we really didn't need a 14th one. And we noticed that people were very adamant about not having a gas station. So we sensed maybe an opportunity that this guy might sell to us. And so we met him, and he initially wanted too much money and we couldn't afford it. And but he said, you know, there are these other people who are interested in the property named Planting Justice. And we'd sort of heard of Planting Justice, and some of my members were regular donors to Planting Justice, but gas station guy is the guy who introduced the two of us to each other, oddly enough. So you never know who might actually put you on a path, an unexpected path. And so when we first met Gavin Raiders in 2018, on September 11th, 2018, we recognized that there was a huge synergy between our organizations. And in 25 years as a pastor, I have to say, we rarely tend to partner with secular organizations like this. And it was just such an obvious thing that we would come together and build the good table. So the church, using its proceeds, was able to finally purchase the property, and Planting Justice is raising the money to renovate it. And here was our open house in 2019. You see Gavin there with his beautiful beard. And to the left there is one of our eldest members who's passed away since, Betty Coates, and many generations coming together. This is a bit of the property, and we're going to be closing that loop that Raul mentioned. This is going to be a part where local farms can find a retail outlet. Planting Justice will operate an organic tree and plant nursery on the property. We will have our pay what you can, pay it forward cafe, and a gathering space for community where we can do education of all sorts, and we can have a farmer's market and crop swaps, and we can become that portal where people can learn about urban agriculture, where we can gather people together. The local food and craft marketplace, for example, this is another, many people around El Sobrante, this is sort of a semi-rural area still. And a lot of people are making lots of crafts, the medicinal plants, multi-ethnic plants, all these different things. This will be a place where people can find a retail outlet and an easily accessible to the mainstream community. And we look forward to doing that. We have monthly work days. This is before COVID, as you can see, no masks, but we have continued through COVID, meeting with masks outside, mostly working in the gardens. Some of the things we're going to do in this project is we're going to mix mercy and justice. Like Planting Justice, our baristas and folks working in the cafe and in the property, at least half will be folks who are formerly incarcerated or difficult to employ. to create good jobs that support people's families. We are harnessing generational gifts. People always say this is such a cool idea. We'd love to do something like this, but we don't know what this looks like. And I say the first thing you need to do is you need a millennial partner. A lot of churches are old people. I'm just here to tell you, a lot of us are old people. We're tired. During the pandemic, 5,000 to 10,000 churches closed per year, and more probably last year. We don't have the statistics. Churches have a tendency, and I shouldn't just say churches, but faith communities of all sorts, often own property. And when that property, when the community becomes too small to be sustainable, that property could be sold or repurposed. And there's a big opportunity here. And I find a lot of secular organizations don't think about working with the faith community. Maybe they've been horribly harmed by various churches and other institutions, but while we certainly don't own the land that those 50 families Gail mentioned own, we don't have that much. There is a lot of property and there is potential capital and partnership. A lot of congregations, and I can tell you as a pastor, I'm beginning to tell people a lot that if you don't really know what ought to happen in your property or thing, think about a millennial organization and think about somebody working in food and agriculture and in justice in ways that you don't traditionally think about it. Not just mercy, but justice and innovative ways of doing this. So as we mix mercy and justice at the good table, we'll be able to do education and community development and access to good food without shame or needs tests. One of the great things about pay what you can and pay it forward is it means that everybody walks into the cafe and it is not a soup kitchen and it is not a food pantry. It's not a place where just the poor come to get food, but anybody can come. And people are invited to give as they are able. And so there are no needs tests and there's no shame involved. Everybody is welcome. And people who have the means are also invited to give back to their own community. So we hope to increase that circle of mercy and justice happening at the same time. One of the things that our cafe has always been designed to be is a place where we can reduce social isolation. Before the pandemic, Contra Costa County estimated that at least 65% of the population had some degree of social isolation. Social isolation is a public health nightmare. It can lead to all, or be a contributing factor to all forms of depression and mental health issues, as well as heart disease and even cancer. And as we know, after over nearly a year in lockdown, I doubt that the level is 65% now. I'd say it's about 95%. We're all socially isolated now. Everybody's social isolated now. And if you weren't social isolated before the pandemic, you now know how hard it is to be cut away from community. And people aren't socially isolated. People aren't always who you think they are. There are certainly elders who may have lost family members, but also people who just don't have good social skills for whatever reason, or have teenagers who are addicted to their phones instead of being able to talk to people. There are generational silos that we all live in. There's certainly racial and economic silos we live in. So being able to have a cafe that is pay what you can, pay it forward, and really welcoming to people, no matter who they are, no matter where they are on life's journey, and to begin to connect those together. We plan to try to find ways to address social isolation. And I expect that by the time we're able to open in fall of this year, God willing, and we get a building permit and we begin the renovation process, people are going to be desperate to be in community together. And we look forward to being a place where that can happen. And we hope that this will be a place too, where instead of the soulless, heartless, cruel gentrification that has happened in the Bay Area, this is a place that even as people move in and we get more and more people from Oakland who move where we are, that we can be a place where justice and mercy are how we deal with one another, rather than NIMBYism and trying to displace even more people. This long history of displacement continues. So this was at our last work day. As you can see, we've got people from all generations safely masked and out working together. As I said, we hope to open in the fall of 2021 if we can get through the permitting process and then our renovation. But it's we're the Planting Justice calls this closing the loop and finding a way to have a retail and public space to support local farms and all the agricultural activity that's happening around food is the part of the circle that we want to occupy, and hope that we can, not only serve our community, but serve as a model for how secular and faith-based nonprofits can work together. And we can also find ways to support all of our local farmers. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Melinda Mclean, Reverend Dr. Melinda Mclean, excuse me. Incredible. So, are you ready to come next and present to us your work, if you will?
I suppose. It's really such an honor to speak with everybody else, and really to be here to hear what they have to say. So in terms of being ready, it's like I'm still just absorbing what everyone else is saying. and would appreciate that. And actually, so for me, my contribution today is I'll be leading an activity that will hopefully help us all sort of take in what Karina, Raul, and Melinda have spoken about. So in preparation for that, I hope you will all take a moment to grab a piece of paper and something to draw with. I'm going to speak a little bit about my work at Minnow while you all go, find a back of an envelope and I don't know, we have a lot of crayons here because I have a 2-year-old. But yeah, for me over at Minnow, like Gail had said in the introduction, I'm a farmer and I've been doing farmer, community, and political organizing because I recognize that there are so many of us independent farm owner operators and farm workers who have been cultivating soil to grow food and we're leasing land. We face a lot of land insecurity. It's hard to build soil health over the years when you might not have years to build it. You might be kicked off by your landlord, even if you have a 5-year lease, which was my experience in for my first farm. And there's a long legacy of that, right, that Gail spoke to at the beginning. And there needs to be this land justice in that we have contributed to this ground, but haven't been able to be secure on it. So that's where Minnow started. But of course, when we talk about land, we have to talk about ancestral lands and Indigenous peoples. And so we can't just say we are going to secure land tenure for farmers of color and be a part of this settler colonial project. So with Minnow, we focus on farmland in California, but there's a bigger picture, which is how are we a part of rematriating the land? And having these conversations about what would it look like if some of our property taxes, right? Everybody who owns property, it's premised on the work and the lands of Indigenous peoples. What if a portion of our property taxes went to Indigenous peoples? When we think more expansively and more creatively and let our imaginations, let us inhabit the space of justice and reparations, what is possible. On our scale of trying to then look at these particular parcels that farmers of color that we work with are trying to acquire. It's then engaging the tribes or people if they're not federally recognized about what kind of relationship to the land can there be? Is it possible to set up first right of refusal for the tribes? So really putting Indigenous sovereignty and rematriation at the fore. And then working with the farmers who we would like to support to have that land tenure, to also, if they're not there yet, to help them, you know, have these relationships with the peoples whose lands it belongs to. So that's minnow work, broadly speaking. We also come from a place of, you know, recognizing that, you know, land is not really a commodity. It's been made into a commodity that's bought and sold, and then it has these sort of insane prices that make it inaccessible to so many of us. But really, land, just as food, it's a fundamental part of life, right? It cannot be a thing that is bought and sold and made into a precious thing that only a few can have. Because just as we all breathe and live, we all touch the ground, and we all belong. So our guiding work, our guiding principles is that, yes, the land doesn't belong to us, we belong to the land. We have a collective responsibility to the land, so that we all can belong, but also for future generations to be able to live healthy lives here. And so that's what I want to kind of have you think about as we go through this exercise, this drawing exercise. And to get you all warmed up, because I don't know if you regularly doodle, we're gonna do a contour drawing. So what that means is we're gonna look at one object together. I'm gonna put up one object, and then we're gonna draw it to get, just draw the contour, the outline of that object, and don't look down. Don't look down at your paper. Don't lift your drawing implement. Just let your mind focus on the contour. And you can thank my child for this object. We're gonna follow this little triceratops, and I'm gonna narrate. So what you do is we'll all look at this top point of the triceratops, and we're gonna go, I guess that is clockwise for you, whatever direction I'm going. So put your pen down, pencil, start at the top, come down, there's that little ripple, might be hard to see, there's a little horn, go around the horn, and then up that nose. Maybe somebody knows the official name for that part of the triceratops body. Going down, and there's that little lip thing, and then up, and then there's the chin, down, and then there's that front leg. All right, there's a second leg. Oh, and then there's that third leg that sticks out, so we'll follow that. And then there's the pink fourth leg. And then there's a tail that looks like a leg. It's like the same size. Okay, don't look down at the paper. Okay, coming up around the back. And there's a hump. And then we should be coming back up to that top piece. All right, you can stop now. Okay. Got your drawing fingers warmed up. All right, if you don't mind sharing your screen, or wait, yes, turning on your screen, we can show each other our drawings. My triceratops has like it looks like a quail, sort of. Wow, Gail, yours is really good. Thank Brooke Porter. Man, there are a lot that are really solid. Leah, wow. Emmy Bender, yours kind of looks like mine. Wow, there are so many just totally solid, well-connected triceratops. I mean, yeah, are you regular at this? Great. Okay, well, so glad we could kind of get that out. Okay, so now for our exercise. Next step is I'd like you to think about a plant that you take care of or have taken care of. So think about, yeah, what does it look like? And you can just start drawing. What's its stalk, or stem or main central thing that holds it together? What does that look like? Is it a thing with branches? You draw its branches. Does it have leaves? Draw some leaves. Does it have fruit? Does it have thorns? How about flowers? Yeah, just take a few moments to fill in this plant that you take care of. Okay, now how about its roots? What are its roots in? Is it in a pot? You can draw the pot. Is it a mosaic pot? Is it in the ground? What does the ground look like? Is it gravelly, sandy? Maybe you have a cactus. Yeah. What is it rooting down in? And then maybe a bit more of its surroundings. You can draw, are there other plants next to it? Is it in a rock garden? Is it like your desk plant that you look at during the day? Just draw a little bit of its surroundings, and then also like who else takes care of this plant? You can draw stick figures, no judgment. My dad is always a stick figure with I don't even know what kind of cap it is, but it's a stick figure with a cap. My dad always knows, oh, that's me in my drawings. And who enjoys this plant as well? They might not take care of it, but they enjoy it too. All right, so you got its plants, it's where it's rooted, its surroundings, other people. And we'll pause there. If you don't mind, we could turn into gallery view and people can hold up their drawings. Now I see some, there's one that looks like a fern in a pot. Gail, is that a orchid?
It's a basil plant that's growing in my bay window.
Oh, basil, all right. Oh yeah, lots of potted plants, cool. Leah, you've got one outside next to the Triceratops. Nice, a lot of potted plants. Cool, thanks for doing that with me. All right, so part of thinking about that is that we have these plants that, yeah, there were a lot of potted plants, right? That our interaction with another non-human living thing is kind of isolated. And the question is, could that plant live without you? If you weren't tending to it, could that plant survive? Just like for us to live, we need more than ourselves, right? And we need that space. So I want this drawing to just stimulate more questions about our connectedness to other living things. and how in our society, it's kind of obsessed with segregation, that you have these plants where if you have that interaction, it's in a pot. Nature is a place that you go to. It's in a park, a national park, or a community park. And that in our home space, we don't really get a lot of chances to integrate nature. And that means also we don't really get a chance to be connected to each other. Because as we tend to plants and the things around us, we too become connected to the other people who are also tending to those spaces. And again, in our society that is really into segregation, right? And saying that there are certain people who don't belong in certain places, certain neighborhoods, or altogether, as we've seen through our systems of incarceration and deportation and creating reservations, right? So I would like for us to think about the things that we have in common that are fundamental for our lives, plants, land, and our collective responsibility to tending all of that for, who is alive now and for the generations to come. I've talked to Gail about using this exercise to kind of start opening up questions for the panelists who've spoken already to also ask questions kind of based on this exercise, connecting their work to what it means about our collective responsibility to each other, right? And you've done a lot of terrific work within your communities and connecting across communities. But then this becomes a question of, for all the people who are participating or listening in on this conversation, how do you see them as being connected to your work as well? How can they be a part of this collective responsibility of land justice and land sovereignty?
Thank you, Mai. Thank you for that exercise. Very refreshing and helped to put so much into context. So thank you for leading us into that. I know that there are quite a few questions in the chat, and I almost want to start out, seeing what folks have to say, questions that they have for the panelists. I've got a list, but we're a little beyond the time where my moderator questions were placed. So I'll give up my moderator questions to our audience. And Leah, is there a question and you can do it in order, or there's one in particular for our panelists or for all panelists? But would you give us an audience question at this point?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Also, if anyone wants to take their mic off mute later and ask a question themselves, I think you can just raise your hand by clicking the little smiley face at the bottom of the screen for hands up. Is that right, Gail? They can do that? Oh, you're on mute, Gail.
Yes.
Yeah, but I can go in order so far. Brian asked a question, prefacing it with probably a dumb question, hopefully not offensive. How helpful is it to talk about land ownership of any kind, even Indigenous land ownership? It seems the foundational problem is people believing they own land and can do with it as they please. Colonizers are the worst offenders of this, and we have to address those profound injustices and oppressions, both historical and ongoing. And I think we have to dismantle the very concept of land ownership itself.
So whichever panelist wants to take a stab at addressing that particular question around land, how do you have land ownership?
I think that this is a really complex kind of a question. I don't think that it's a straightforward answer. when we were starting to do the work around preserving and protecting the sacred sites of our ancestors and wanting them to come home, and being a non-federally recognized tribe without a land base, it seemed like a land trust was a tool that we could use in order to get to the goal that we wanted to get to, in order to hold land, to return ancestors back, to hold land so that we can return to our cultural ceremonies without having to worry about outside interference. And really, that's what rematriation is about. It's about allowing Indigenous people the rights to have a place where they can return back to their to our traditional ways of being in connection with the land. I always say ownership with the quotation marks around it, because we don't believe in, as Indigenous people, in ownership. We were caretakers of particular parts of land that we had a relationship with. We had a relationship with the mountain and the waterways, and how we were supposed to be in relationship with that land as a part of creation, not outside of that creation system. And we've gotten ourselves away from, as human beings, away from that ideology, that idea of us being a part of something rather than being part from it. And so it's going to take a lot of work on a lot of different people's ways. And I think that people that are on this panel and people that are in the audience today are doing amazing work to try to figure out, how do we come back in right relationship with the lands that we're tending to? How do we begin to create those relationships with each other so that we are interdependent again as human beings? And when Reverend Dr. Melinda talked about the ways that people are isolated, and human beings were never supposed to be isolated. We're supposed to live in community. We're supposed to be dependent on each other for the things that we need. In the Bay Area 200 years ago, and this is not that long ago, right? It's like my grandma, my auntie, who's the matriarch of our family, is 84, 2 of her lifetimes ago, right? There was no such thing. There's no concept of hunger or homelessness in the Bay Area 200 years ago. And yet we see a horrific wave of this happening, because as human beings, we see we are working against something that is killing us off as human beings and killing off the planet. 200 years ago, you could drink out of every freshwater creek in the Bay Area. So how has society moved forward in 200 years better than what had been happening here for thousands of years beforehand? I think that, and I don't believe that we cannot move ourselves into a position where we're taking better care of each other, the water, the land, so that we can survive. And so it is not about it. It's about not about ownership, but it's about co-creating a world that's different than the world that we live in now.
Mhm. Thank you, Karina. I'm wondering also about the role of the commons. Each one of you in your particular efforts are looking at a community approach. And that is so very antithetical to, individual property ownership. But I'm wondering if any of you all would like to speak to the notion of this notion of the commons approach to caring for land and its relationship to sovereignty, if we can kind of stretch it into there. And I'll close that question right there to any of the panelists that want to address that.
Yeah, I'll kind of offer from our side. I think building off of what Karina said is that, there is a way forward, and one that honors what we see when we look back, when we honestly look back and account for everything that's happened. And for us, and connecting to your question, Gail, about like the commons, is that There are land trust models. I think more people are familiar with that, but the land trust really depends on, this entity, typically a nonprofit, that holds onto the trust. So then you're needing to maintain that nonprofit. Then there's questions of who's on that board. And then when it comes to our work with farmers, it can be challenging for farmers to actually build equity on that land. And then we run the risk of repeating the problems of farmers doing work on the land and not really, sort of reaping its benefits in a way that is, builds sort of intergenerational wealth. So as we've grappled with sort of the challenges that we've seen with the land trust model so far, and like conservation easements as means to also ensure that lands kind of stay within particular forms of use, that in trying to account for multiple kinds of relationship to the land, we really start from bringing the people who have that relationship to land together first to understand their relationship to each other and to the land, and then what mechanisms are useful to account for that and to retain some accountability to each other, right, and to the health of the land. And so what's been promising in our exploration so far with the people we work with is the cooperative model. By having a cooperative where each stakeholder has one member, has a vote, it democratizes our titles and relationships to land, right, which is a really radical departure from how land has been managed, right? Which is like a few people determine how everybody else can use the land. And that's been encoded through policy and then sort of exercised with property ownership. And so there's the possibilities for when, again, we start with the conversation as opposed to the tools, starting with the conversation and then figuring out the tools that meet those needs and honors everybody's relationship. So yeah, just offering that, as I know that people are they hear a lot about like what, we need to have land justice and land sovereignty, but don't often hear about, what are the mechanisms that we can do that to achieve that. So just offering sort of, these are some of our learnings so far.
Raul or Karina, Dr. Melinda, would you like to address that or any of? I do want to see if there is a specific question to any of our panelists that the audience put out. I want to make sure we get everyone a chance to address some of these questions. Melinda?
I noticed in the chat someone asking about how are you funding these things in poor communities? And I just wanted to address that a little bit, at least from our perspective and from my own perspective. I think one of the things that is helpful for me as a religious and spiritual person is I actually believe that every single being on earth, be it human, plant, vegetable, mineral, trees, are of equal and loving value. And so I sort of reject the notion that everything has to be all about just serving the poor. That's why we're pay what you can and pay it forward. And the One World Everybody Eats Foundation, which is the organization for pay what you can cafes around the United States, talks about the only way that the model of pay what you can and pay it forward works is if you're in an economically diverse area. So if you just, and Panera Bread proved this, they went into significantly impoverished areas with their pay what you can cafes and they failed badly. It also doesn't work to go in to Pacific Heights and put in a pay what you can cafe. No one's going to be able to go there. So you have to be in a place that is economically diverse. And the One World Everybody Eats Foundation says You need to be within a mile of a dollar store, check, in El Sobrante. And you need to be within a mile of $1 million houses, check, for El Sobrante. So we have that mix of people. We're not just trying to feed the poor. Again, that the mercy models tend to work that way. But if you're going to do mercy and justice, you're not only going to feed people who are hungry and provide access to good food, but you're also going to invite people who have means to participate in acts of justice. That could be as much as we in the cafe are going to have an honor system drip coffee urns out in the cafe, where you go and you pay whatever you can or nothing at all, or you throw a 20 in and buy a round for the house. One World Everybody Eats has discovered that this works really quite well. About 15% will pay less than the suggested price, and about 15% will pay more, and hopefully will be sustainable. Now, I have no idea if we're going to pull this off, but in a capitalist system, we're willing to experiment with how to create a just marketplace. We're also willing to ask people for money who have money. Planting Justice is very good at this. They've raised $950,000 towards our renovation. At least over $600,000 of that is from major donors, including one single young philanthropist from New York who they'd never met, who gave us $500,000. So you have to be able to ask rich people for money. You just have to be able to do that, recognizing that they are of value and beloved and may be looking for opportunities to actually do this sort of work. So sometimes I think when we talk about the poor, or we talk about some of these issues, we forget that rich people are people too, and sometimes may appreciate the invitation to give and participate. And so that's an important way to do this funding, and also how to mix mercy and justice at the same time, is to not separate people based on economics.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Melinda. That was, you also addressed some areas of the commons within your answer. I want to ask each one of you, it's apparent that you were all on a particular path, and it was what seems to have been the success story is the preparation meeting opportunity. Karina, in your role, you've always been working for decades to get back ancestral land, honoring the community. Raul, you've been doing this, and then when the AB 551 came, you stepped right in. Your church, the UCC, Reverend Dr. Melinda, you all have been wanting to give back, and your work of building a community that people of color had greater access. So you've been on this path, and now that you've had some successes, I wonder, what's your vision? What do you see as what you would love to have as an outcome for greater land sovereignty, land justice, and land access in the cases that, you know, are specific to your organization? And yeah, let me start with you, Raul. What do you see? Where's the vision? Where are you going next with this work, especially with the regard to the justice part?
Yeah, you know, we're happy with the work that we've been doing, but we felt that we needed to focus a lot of our vision in our work through a stronger food sovereignty lens. And so we really did some work on that internally with the staff and some of our key volunteers to come up with a better strategic plan to address that. And in order to make that shift, we're starting a program called the Shared Garden. And we're looking at improving the health of the family through backyard gardens, that eventually improves the health of the neighborhood, that eventually improves the health of the community, that eventually turns into community power to make a difference in their communities through policy work. And the way it works is that we're partnering with 2 elementary schools. This is the first year we're doing this. This is our pilot year. So we're partnering with 2 elementary schools with very high free lunch programs in the in around 94%. So the instructors at those schools in the classes K through 3rd grade will be teaching some of the curriculum. Will be teaching the kids about organic gardening. We're going to supply them with raised beds so they can actually go out in the schoolyard and practice some of the instruction that they're getting. And then we're going to enroll their parents of those classes in our adult home gardening program. So they will have their garden in their backyard. So when the kids go home, they'll actually be able to understand what the parents are doing in the garden and work together. And hopefully build on that family dynamic and, get people to eat healthy. And eventually what we want, if we can build critical mass, usually we go into a food insecure community and we'll stay there for 2 or 3 years, really kind of helping as many families as we can. Well, through this program, we're going to stay in the community. We're not going to move. And as more and more children enroll into that classroom, we're going to keep giving the kids instruction while we keep enrolling their parents into our adult program. Eventually hopefully building critical mass where we can start community building activities, like maybe having a farmer's market on the school grounds where, the community come in, and meet each other. The families that gone through our program can grow the produce and sell it, earn a little bit of income, and, eventually build community strength to eventually start looking at policy work, voter registration, really become kind of a voting block for their particular council members to take on issues that they've been thinking about for a long time. So this is kind of what we're going in part of that plan is to eventually buy small plots of land in those communities. So like if a house has been demolished and there's this empty lot, we've already started a capital campaign to purchase one of these lots, turn it into a really small micro farm, put in one of our super jardineros that actually can grow the seedlings in that community, get people involved in that particular small plot, grow the food, offer it to the local community at a very reduced price or free. As people are coming by and looking at this green plot of land, they might say, I'd love to do that. Enroll them into our home gardening program. Customize what kind of seedlings they want. Well, I'd like to grow this. I'm Vietnamese, I want to grow this. The super jardinero can actually grow custom seedling orders for the community. And through that collective engagement, we hope to make some difference when it comes to food justice, social justice, things like that.
Who would like to go next? Karina?
Thank you so much. Those are beautiful ideas, Raul. Would love to figure out how we all can, that's why I love sitting on panels like this, because then we figure out how do we work together? How do we cross-pollinate the ideas and how do we move forward? When Janelle and I first started Segurate Land Trust, it was really looking at the urban areas and looking at exactly what Raul was saying, all these empty lots all over in the urban areas, and what a beautiful way for us to reimagine what our communities could look like. And so we really was thinking about this checkerboard idea of freeing these lots and really engaging community back into what that looks like. And teaching young people about the true history of where they live, and then giving them the opportunity to be caretakers of those pieces of land with the community and to be able to tell those stories. And so really looking at having young people engage. And so many of the young people that we work with, you know, never had gardening experience. They've never grown anything before, because when we grow up in urban areas, that's not something that we do. So I'm really happy to hear that Raul is planning on doing such a thing in the communities. You know, it's really about when we look at the talk about the gentrification that happens in the Bay Area. We, as Ohlone people, were the first people gentrified out of our territory, and still are continuously having to do that. When we look at the next generations, the younger generations, they still have no access to their own land spaces. They have no solid places that they can call home. They're always in like many of the people in the Bay Area, always in flux of trying to figure out where they can live, you know, and so trying to figure out how do we find lands that we can live on together, and how do we recreate village-like systems, and how do we create, and so there's a lot of different, we're partnering with people that are have been working on our creek systems and re-engaging the community in language around that. We're re-engaging people around how do we shore up our bay, and then reintroduce our oysters that have been there and our clams and stuff, in order for us to use ways of doing that, kind of creating that wall for us as climate disaster happens, and then bringing back sustainable foodways that had been in our tribal territory for thousands and thousands of years. How do we begin to work with the park districts in bringing back our ideas of taking care of this land and using our traditional ecological knowledges of fire tending, and really being able to bring back, and not thinking of fire as disaster, but as a tool, as a partner with us, and really having conversations like that. Getting to the cities to return land. And, you know, I think that one of the folks that are doing a lot of work, you know, there's a lot of Native people that are doing a lot of work around land back, you know, and so that's not just a slogan, land back, give it all back. And then let's figure out, how do we start this over again? How do we begin? Because there's room for everybody here, but we need to learn how to re-envision it in a different kind of way. So, you know, now we have young people that are working with us and say, oh, I just saw this piece of land over here. Oh, it would be great if we could put something over there, you know. And so to reimagine in our own neighborhoods where we grew up, that there can be something totally different, and that it could re-engage everybody that now lives here. And I think that that's really what Sigorte is really trying to do, is to create partnerships, to create relationships with people that are in our territories. And then how do we go about this in a different way? But it really is about relationship building. And, you know, I had beautiful community organizations come together recently and said, you know, we want to rematriate land. And I was like, but we don't know each other. And what does rematriate mean to you? And how do we build a relationship so that this is an ongoing process? It's not something that happens in a drop of a bucket, like land acknowledgements, not a checkoff box. We want to just do this and use this as a tool. But it really is about building relationships for the next 7 generations and beyond. It's really about doing that. And so, you know, I'm hoping that Sigorte Land Trust offers those opportunities in the Bay Area to create those relationships with people that are here wanting to do that good work.
Thank you. Reverend Dr. Melinda, I'll let you, where do you envision the work of UCC?
Well, I have to say right now, because we're trying to get a building permit and we are fighting our way through the unbelievable bureaucracy of dealing with renovation and land, and there will come a time very soon where I'm going to tell a lot of stories about how horrible this process has been. It has been absolutely soul-crushing horrible. And I have now so many things on my justice list, I hardly know where to begin. But right now, we just have to drag it across the finish line so that we can do the renovation and get the project up on its feet. So that's where we are right now. But there's so much work to do that I think is unseen. We think about the ecological systems and the farming, but a lot of doing this work, at least from my perspective, also means being able to not only navigate governmental processes, but legal processes. And it's complicated work, and there are a lot of barriers. There are so many ways. I think if anybody has read The Color of Law, the way that racism was built into the code, I think about, for example, when my member of this church bought this house in 1955, she used the GI Bill. Well, people of color weren't allowed to do that because she was a white woman. She was able to use the GI Bill to purchase this property. And I say that because there's so much legal work that it takes to be involved in any of these land conversations. And it's the part of the work I dislike the very most, but I'm probably called to do some work around. So I think we need, because we are going to be, and I appreciate the word commons, that hasn't been language we've used at all. We've just used community gathering space. We've kind of used that language more, but commons is not a bad description for part of what we're doing. But we hope to be a place where those conversations and workshops and ways that people can get into this process and get the tools and resources need, I hope that we'll be able to help with that. And especially the very complicated, difficult parts of dealing with the legal system and all of the governmental regulation and all of that. So we may have a role to play in that, in addition to just getting our cafe open and the nursery open and just getting open.
All right, thank you. We will let you have the last comment on that question.
I'm a bit kind of overwhelmed by the question. I think also partially overwhelmed because I'm so excited to hear what everyone else has said. And like Karina said, it's like, oh, being on these panels, then it's like, oh, you hear other people's visions, like, how do we connect? And so right now I'm in more of like this, like, yes, let's like keep talking and build relationships and envision together. And that is a part of my vision, right? Is that we can envision together and actualize together, right? That we actually all have power to do that. And to get there, there needs to be so much equity work so that we have equal power, right? And it's just been such a crushing time in the past year, being a part of a community that is disproportionately affected by COVID and how it's related to the ways in which we've been disempowered from being able to like just determine our life outcomes. So I like that Melinda really grounded the answer in specifics, which is opening the cafe. And so I think I will maybe speak from there, which is that as one of the panelists who works in a rural space and not so much urban, but really feeling like for farmers of color, only 2% of US farmland is owned by farmers of color, right? I don't want to give up the rest of that land, right? When we need to use that land to grow culturally relevant crops and then to feed our communities that are in rural and urban areas. So I'd love to have this vision of interconnectedness where it's just us as farmers are connected with initiatives like Raoul's, where they're growing these seedlings. And importantly, because we've lost 94% of our seed diversity in the past century, right? That the seed diversity is coming from these immigrant and indigenous communities that are still growing them out. And so while it's hard for us to have that at scale in rural farmlands, but if we have that connection where, say, schools and community gardens are being seed stewards to then, you know, be connected to us so that we can grow it at scale and feed more people, you know, that regionalism based on people and communities and culture, I think is really key, right? And then connecting that to this time of the pandemic where we really see the importance of regional food systems, because big has been disrupted again and again with fires, wildfires, pandemic, floods, blackouts, right? So there is this vision within community, and I would say, again, you know, looking forward is always about looking back. And for me, I did grow up in an urban area, a neighborhood that is incredibly diverse. Over 80 languages are actively spoken in this neighborhood alone. And where we grew food in an unused space, and eventually they built a freeway through it, but I've done a lot of work to try to expand community gardens in urban areas through policy and reducing the permits and costs there. And it's been so terrific to be in these spaces where, like, we would grow amaranth and we use the leaves for cooking soups, but then our like Somali neighbors were like, wait, why are you harvesting those leaves? We eat it as grain. And I didn't realize that, but when you have people together in that diversity within urban areas, right, you can see the connections that we already have to each other through our plants, through the land. And then when we save those seeds together to connect with farmers who are stewarding larger portions of land to be able to then feed, again, more people. I think that interconnectedness is really a part of this vision that I'm trying to more clearly, you know, give space for, and that, yeah, these conversations can't be isolated. Our conversations about growing food, about Indigenous rematriation, about climate change, they can't be separated from each other. And we can really have those conversations in ways that speak to our particular experiences when we all have power. And I think power is through not only policies and us holding positions of elected positions of power, but also having this common connectedness, stewardship of land.
Thank you, Mai. Appropriately great closing remark. I see each one of your approaches about the ecosystem that you're working in. Everything you're doing, you're actually establishing a more sustainable, stable ecosystem. That's part of the Commons approach, but it's the intention of your work. And I am just so impressed by each one of you. Thank you for being on this panel and sharing all the wonderful strategies that you all are using. Thank you for sharing your visions. And these are very important relationships that we must continue to maintain and expand and grow on. And I think it's something you said, Karina, it really stuck with me. It's like with these relationships, then we reconnect to each other. We reconnect to the essence of our ancestor relationship and the way that we are to be with each other on this planet. And that is all really centered around land. And so it's really important to make sure that we center our thoughts, you know, our care around how we steward the land, how we care for each other on the land. And thank you for that exercise, Mai, of really kind of bringing us all together on a common landscape of putting those plants up, because those are about, you know, relationships to soil and plant and life. And we've got a couple of minutes. We've got two, well, from where I am, it's 2:57. Would anyone like to say anything before we close this wonderful panel?
Gail, I'm not sure if you can see Darlene Franco had, I believe, raised their hand, or maybe just DM'd.
Yes, go right ahead, Darlene.
Hi, sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to respond. I thank the panelists. It was great conversations. But I did want to respond to the gentleman or whoever it was that asked about land ownership earlier. So, you know, for our people, the Native people here, our land ownership isn't the same for us because we don't feel like we actually own the land, like Karina says, but the land owns us, like Mai was saying also, because we love and care for and live with the land and the waters in our area. But what ownership in this society today, what it allows us to do is to be free to do what we need to do, to hunt, to gather, to love and to care for our area. As a child, I grew up gathering basketry materials with my grandma down by the riverbanks. And one day there were fences put up. So we just climbed through the fences and we still continued to gather. And then the next time we went back, there were, you know, ranchers, they brought out guns and they didn't let us on their land. And because most of the things that we gathered for our baskets were considered weeds, and in their way, they started to try to kill them with pesticides. And so when we process materials to make our baskets, we use our hands and we use our mouths. So it led to sores in our mouths. It led to even tooth loss for some of the elders that were, you know, cleaning the sticks and the roots. So, you know, it's different because we weren't allowed to do the things and to care for the land as we had for centuries. Our creation stories tell us that we were created to be caretakers of the land here. And we were meant to live on this land. Our teachings and our languages are embedded in the land, in this landscape. So I can go to the places where all the animal people gathered and human beings were created. So our creation places, our healing places, places that we gathered food, basketry, and medicinal places in the area. I can't go to Florida or Arizona and find those things that I need to be well. It has to be here. So to hear Karina's facts about how many of her people living in their area actually own the land or have freedom on their land, it's sad. But it's even sadder that it's a common statistic for most of our Native people in this area. So owning land is different for us. And there's a lot deeper roots than just to say, I have a place that I own and I can pay taxes on. So I just wanted to add that, a little bit of a different kind of understanding of why it's different for us.
Thank you
Thank you.
so much, Darlene.
Thank you, darling.
Wow, well, we're right at 3. Is there anything administrative we want to do, Leah or Dr. Jennifer, that we want to ask of our audience before we release everyone? All right. Well, thank you all again for joining us. I'm sure you learned a lot. I believe this will be recorded and available for access later. So keep up the great work, each one of our panelists, and for every one of our audience. Thank you for understanding the importance of being able to access land and have land sovereignty. This is what we're all fighting for. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail. Thanks to all the panelists, fabulous. For anyone who's still listening on, please go to our Growing Roots website for more information about the panelists, links to their contact information, and links to recordings that will be shared. So wonderful, inspiring message. Thank you.